So without further ado, Mel's going to be talking about strategic foresight. That's so 2020. And so Mel is a Sydney-based futures designer. She's a 2020 NextGen Practitioner Fellow and holds a Master of Strategic Foresight from Swinburne. Really exciting. Really excited to have you on tonight, Mel. So can't wait for your talk and can't wait to see how interactive it's going to be, because I know that that's definitely something that really deals with Zoom fatigue in a great way. So I'm really looking forward to your talk. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, thanks so much, Adam and Holly and everyone. Great to be with you. I'm very excited to be asked to talk about strategic foresight. So let me share my screen.
All right, I'll drop off. Thanks, Mel.
Alrighty. Okay, so you should all see my screen here now. How's that going? Everyone see the slides there? Strategic foresight. That's so 2020. Is that all good?
Yep, all good.
Fantastic. All right, well, I think it is kind of timely, as Adam said, and I was really excited when Adam said, hey, do you want to talk about strategic foresight? Because I'll be honest and say that before this time, actually, I think a lot of people just thought, gosh, what is that? What is strategic foresight? But then I think we've had a situation where we've sort of had this happen, where we're kind of wondering what is this? I'll come back to that, but just contemplate that image and kind of missing out on seeing planes in the sky and how much the world's changed. Just a little bit about me. I know some of you, I can see some familiar faces on the call, which is really nice, but also great to meet some new folks. As Adam said, I call myself a futures designer, and I'll come to that in a moment, how that all kind of comes together, because I'm really interested in how, I have a background in design and UX, and I'm really interested in using systems thinking within that, but also I like to bring futures and foresight in as well, as an integral part of that. So I almost like this nice little bit in the middle there where those things intersect. That to me is the kind of sweet spot, and it's really exciting when you can kind of almost create a kind of degustation of the best elements of those three things, which I think are really all really powerful tools. So I guess I'm coming on here tonight to, I guess, just to give you some background on how futures can work in with design and systems thinking as well. So the whole question of what is strategic foresight, and I'll say as well that I'm using the term strategic foresight because Adam said he used that term, and that is the kind of term that people use, but also I'm going to use that interchangeably with the idea of futures. So that whole question of what that is kind of like how long is a piece of string, and I could definitely go off on all sorts of tangents with that, and I think we'll just, in a sense, put that to one side for another talk another time, and I think what we can actually say, what is strategic foresight, expressed through actually a better question, which is actually why futures thinking, or why strategic foresight. So I think we live in a time now that really thinking about futures and being strategic about and being foresightful is kind of well, very timely, as Adam said, and I think we've all had a real jolt. And I guess we'd all get a different answer if we, just roll back to, just before the new year, and compare that to now. And that's, I think that's one of the big whys for me about foresight and futures. I think this is a beautiful quote that sums it up, really. Anyone who is surprised by what we're going through right now hasn't been paying attention to what scientists have been telling us for over 30 years. Carl Zimmer from New York Times kind of hit the nail on the head with that. And I think why that's relevant to futures is because actually what's happening now isn't a black swan event. It isn't something that we didn't predict. It's just that we didn't see it. We didn't pay attention to it in enough. We didn't give it we almost didn't think that it was going to happen, because it's just like it was oh, this is a wild card. But actually, you know, part of what Futures is about is actually enabling us to be able to think, like prepare ourselves mentally for the prospect of something like this that is actually highly probable. And then coming back to this whole idea about, you know, what is this? And I've actually got this little plane here. This is my daughter's little plane. And I think this is another really beautiful encapsulation of why I think Futures is so relevant, because you know, I remember the day when I was picking my daughter up from school, and it was the day that the Australian borders closed. I mean, you know, no more planes were going to be arriving. It was just an extraordinary day. And again, the thought that well, a lot of people, I think, might have thought that this was, you know, could have happened, but it's like as a society, we didn't prepare ourselves for it. We almost didn't, we kind of blocked off from the potential of that, and just thought, oh, that's just from a disaster movie. So, you know, in a sense, this is kind of a Kodak moment for our whole, you know, the whole civilization. And I guess we really, you know, I think if we can take what's happening now, both the bushfires, and then right on the back of that, we've then had this extraordinary, you know, pandemic hit us. It's how can we kind of face up to the reality of the potential of things that can happen, and embrace the fact that we live in these, you know, the VUCA times with, you know, volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity, and actually how we can shift that into something where we actually reframe to have some level of foresight and anticipation about things. So obviously climate change is another big part of this as well. William Gibson really sums this up beautifully here. You know, I just think we live in such an extraordinary precipice, and you know, that for me is a really big why. You know, I just, it kind of, at some point in the future, dare I say it, will probably, you know, people will look back and think, as it says there, that we've been very short-sighted if we don't embrace this and actually come up with a way of, well, yeah, going forward and taking, yeah, just embracing the reality of what's happening in terms of climate change. All right, so just to quickly go over the idea of futures, I think this is really, really central to this whole question of why, and it's also, I guess, the question of what is strategic foresight. It actually is about thinking through all the potential things that could happen, and sort of breaking ourselves out of the idea of the future. I mean, we talk about the future all the time, and there's all this real trend at the moment of thinking about the future of work and the future of smart cities and the future of, you know, this and that, future of energy. And I guess I really implore you to kind of really think about the fact that there isn't, you know, I think we really need to kind of take that idea of the future and just try and think in terms of all the multiplicity of different futures that actually could emanate right from this moment. And I guess I'm really interested, as I said, in this sweet spot of how design, foresight, and systems thinking can kind of fit together. And I guess, so I'm not suggesting that futures is something to replace design or systems thinking. I think they complement each other. And coming back to this idea of futures, this is a beautiful illustration, I think, of how we can reframe from the future to futures. And I don't know if anyone's out there. Can anyone maybe in the chat tell me if you've seen this before? I hope that some people have, and I really want to popularize the futures cone, because I think this is a beautiful summary of the fact that, I mean, if we think about the idea of the future, we're going to just go with this projected future here, and that as if what's happening now is just an extrapolation of business as usual, and that's it. But and we've got my daughter in the background, they're having dinner, which is lovely, isn't it? But if we're thinking from the perspective of futures, then there's all of these different types of futures out there. You know, in this moment, we could have the things that we would like to have happen, the things that we think are probable to happen, the things that are plausible. And actually, I just draw your attention to this idea of the preposterous. That is, I think, the place where the really exciting things can happen, the things that we don't think will ever happen that seem completely impossible. Watch that space, because that's really, really the place where, you think back 5 years ago or 10 years ago, the things that we now live with that are normal. Think back when you're in high school and the things that didn't exist that now exist. I'll come back to the idea of the preposterous, but it's actually a really interesting space where really interesting change can happen. So let's just dig a little bit deeper into the idea of what is the future. And a nice way to sum this up is there's a really interesting futurist from Hawaii called Jim Data, and he came up with this. I'm sure he's doing this as a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of joke, but his first law of the future is that the future can't be predicted because the future doesn't exist. And his next law of the future is that any useful idea about the future should appear to be ridiculous. And that, I think, really speaks to this idea of the preposterous, being on all of these things that we don't think could ever happen. If it's actually going to be useful, if we're going to break the mold of the ideas that we just assume are going to happen, then unless we go with the preposterous, then we're kind of going to really miss the mark and just be perpetuating what's already happening. So what we might do now, I want us to kind of get in and actually have a go at doing this together for real. So let me just grab the Miro board link, and what we're going to do is have a go at mapping out some different futures. I'll give you this Miro link, so you should all have that in the chat now. And I'll actually share my screen with that link. So if everyone jumps on that link, you don't need to have a login to. There we go. Oh, great. Thanks, Adam's just shared that again as well. So everyone can just jump in there. And what we want to do is use the Miro board here to, essentially this is a kind of futures cone. So in here we've got some possible or projected futures as if, just business as usual. Then we've got probable, things we think, on the basis of what exists now, that's probably going to happen. Things that are plausible, like, oh yeah, that might happen. That's it could happen based on the current knowledge that we have. And then we've got the preposterous. So I'm thinking, if we could start mapping out, just grab some Post-it notes there. I've populated with some Post-it notes, so we've got some ready to go. Just start, as per the instructions up here, what images of the future are you seeing and hearing about UX at the moment? So, I'm sure you've all done this before. And start classing them, things that you think that are possible, sort of, I guess, fairly pedestrian sort of things. Things that you think, well, it's probable, yeah, it's probably going to happen. The plausible, and then anything preposterous. So let's take say 5 minutes to do that. Adam, you got any other things you want to add, clarifications on that? 5 minutes okay if we give people some time just to start populating that?
Yeah, I think 5 minutes is fine. I think that'll work well. But I think if anyone's not used Miro before, just jump in and just double tap on the Post-it notes and just type, or you can start typing text and it'll go over it. But yeah, double tap on the Post-it note and play. This is cool.
All right, just set a little timer here and away we go.
I started a timer down the bottom.
Fabulous, great. Thanks, Adam, brilliant. So you see I've put, just so everyone can see, I've put the futures cone up there as well. Just got some explanations of the various, what the different meanings of each of those different P's. Yeah, so just as it says there, I guess what I'm interested in us doing is mapping the futures we're all seeing in terms of UX.
That's time, Mel.
Great, thanks Adam, brilliant.
No worries.
All right, so
Lost your video though, Mel?
yeah, I switched it off for now, just to we keep a stable.
Oh, gotcha.
If that's all right, I'll
That's fine.
So,
Yeah.
All right, so we've got lots of activity in there and some preposterous. I'm seeing some preposterous things there, which is great. NBN will actually be reliable for everyone. We don't travel overseas anymore. Anyone else want to jump in and sort of say something they're seeing there that interests them, that's unexpected or something that just anything grab your attention there, Adam?
Just having a look now. The accessibility models is interesting. I like accessibility. I also like design ethics.
Yeah, it's good when we
I think
see ethical UX as being a projected thing. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no. I was just going to say, I just also saw the brain-machine interfaces too, and the neural links and that sort of stuff. I know we've seen a little bit of that in the news with Elon Musk again talking about it. So that presents obviously ethical challenges too.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to see ethics right there in the centre. As a projected, kind of business as usual thing. I think that's a sign of things.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks everyone for jumping in and doing that. That's really great. I just wanted to give you that as a sort of, I guess, a flavour of one approach you can take with when you're thinking about different ways of categorising different types of futures. Even just the idea that there are different types of futures possible is revolutionary, I think, for a lot of people. I'm sure it's not for you all, but it just gives us another frame of reference when you're thinking about how design and futures can work together. So the reason, I guess, that I've done that quick exercise is that let me just get back to my slide here. Oh dear, don't you love that? Sorry, just bear with me and I'll just keep having a little look at that and I'll get back on the right spot here. Okay, here we go. So interestingly, when we, I purposely took out something down the bottom here, sort of fiendishly left out the preferable. And I think that's key to the next thing I wanted to just have a, to concentrate on, which is this idea about what I think is the really big why of futures, which is the fact that it can help to explore what I call used futures. And this term used futures is actually a concept that Suhail Inyatala came up with. You might have heard of him. He's actually from the University of the Sunshine Coast. I think I don't know if you'd call him a futurist. I don't know if he uses that term, but he's somewhat a strategic foresight practitioner. He came up with the causal layered analysis, which is a fantastic process, which I can talk through that later if anyone has any questions. But his idea of used futures is all about unconscious and implicit aspects of kind of images of the future that we might have that we just project onto. It's like the business as usual, as if we're going to just carry what we've got now into the future. It's a kind of extrapolation, and it's like it's kind of an adopted process where it's without thought of people or place. So things that are completely out of just taking one thing and plonking it from one context into another. So an example might be of a used future. Like this is a colleague of mine from Action Foresight recently, well, when he could travel, was in Fiji, and he noticed this. He saw this was a beautiful example of a used future. This building that had kind of this design of a building that had sort of been transplanted almost into this area, surrounded by buildings, nothing like it. It was like a kind of foreign thing sort of plonked in. Another example where I think of used futures is, when you think about smart cities, and I just did a Google search on smart cities, and you get all these sort of futuristic images, and it's almost like the flying car equivalent of what we think things are going to be like. And that in so many ways limits the thinking we're going to have about, we just carry forward all of these things from now instead of examining them in detail. So I think actually another way to think about the questions that we ask about the future is through the lens of these 4 kinds of questions. And this is a really interesting list that Ariella Helfgott, from a colleague of mine from Collaborative Futures, came up with. So there's, you can think about what will probably happen, and what do we actually want to have happen, then what could possibly happen, and then what are we going to do about it? Now, interestingly, I think there's often a case, in that little process that we just did before on the mirror board, like, I purposely didn't put anything there about what we want to have or not, I left that out on purpose, because I think that speaks to almost having experience of the used futures being a situation where you just, just think about, well, this is probably going to happen and this is what could happen, instead of actually really examining the underlying assumptions that we might have about what could happen, what do we actually want to have happen. So there's a whole lot more that I could say about the process of, why we might do, or how we might do foresight, and various different processes you could use. But I thought it might be useful to actually kind of just leave it there, and to go and put this question to you all as as a community, like how might it be different if we created preferred futures together, and particularly in terms of a preferred future for UX. And if you're interested, I could talk more about some of the processes that we use within Foresight to kind of uncover assumptions, and to think about, to kind of unearth what's often called images of the future, that people might have, these kind of unconscious images. But for now, like, maybe you want to kind of go to any questions that people might have.
Hey Mel, we will ask people to put some questions into Q&A, but I guess for me at the moment, it's one of those questions about, that was a really interesting about what do we want to happen? How do we think about what we want to happen when the current environment is so claustrophobic?
Mm-hmm.
Is my question, because I think that a lot of people are almost roadblocked by what is a very, a highly high amount of anxiety. Lots of people who are reading the news every day. There's the COVIDometer. It's very hard to see into the future when your future today feels so bleak. So I wonder what it is that we do to talk about what we want to happen.
That is a fantastic question. Well, there's any number of, the idea of people, I'm sure the people within design would relate to this, that you can kind of do design or do futures to people, but actually do it, and then you can do it with people. Actually, there's a really interesting movement that is developing within, obviously within design, but also within futures, of participatory and collaborative processes that really work, I guess, speak to people's lived experience, and that the first person kind of approaches, but also participatory in a true sense, which actually enable people to be part of a I mean, I actually feel like the time has come for people to actually feel that they can be part of the process of genuinely being part of shaping futures. And in the same way that we really, I think, as designers have realized that we've got to get beyond, doing design to people. That actually, how can you have people be both represented in a really wholehearted way, in a kind of real way, and also letting people to be involved in, and actually participate in a real way. But then to speak to another part of your question is, is it doing that when things are bleak? I mean, I guess, are you saying, is it it's a bit of a downer? Is it, or kind of, is it something that's too hard at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's that sort of sense that you know, we all like the idea of, you know, people are, you know, like the idea of a futures, but they can't see that at the moment because of just needing to be able to buy sandwiches. You know, there's a concern about that sort of, you know, the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy. If we're not dealt with at that level, psychologically feeling safe, then how can we get to that further point?
Yeah, well, so actually, I agree with you in a way, and so it's got to be done very carefully, because the images of the future that you have, and in fact, I'll put up a. I'm still sharing my screen, aren't I? Let me just flick to this particular. Like, I think this sums it up beautifully. This notion. This is from a really interesting book called "Images of the Future," the Image of the Future by Fred Pollack, and he. You know, his quote here where he talks about the rise and fall of images of the future precedes or accompanies the rise and fall of cultures. And he talks about a flourishing kind of view that we have about, you know, and how that's an indicator of the, you know, the sort of health of our culture. And I actually, some people, you know, you could argue, oh, thinking about futures in this way is a luxury, or how do we do that when people are trying to survive? But actually, that's all the more, I would argue, that's the time that people need to be involved in that, actually. And it's not to diminish the really difficult situation that a lot of people are in at the moment. Absolutely, when people have lost their job, or, you know, they're trying to feed their kids, and you know, like, there are a lot of people having you know, real practical, tangible, you know, gut-wrenching kind of difficulties. But I guess, speaking to, you know, to what Fred Pollack's talking about here, it's actually, this is the time to do that. And I think an artful process of foresight would actually enable to meet people at that place where they are, and actually that, you know, it doesn't, it respects where people are actually at.
Yeah. All right, we've got, sorry, you want to take them through the questions in here, Holly?
That's all right. I thought I'd just jump in while the questions came up from James. So just leading on from what you were talking about then, he asks, how do we make space for exploring possible preferred futures as part of our UX methodology when the focus by de facto is very much on designing for now or next week?
That's a great question. Yeah, I actually, okay, a couple of things I could say there. That, in a sense, the idea of talking about futures and thinking that it is a bit of a misnomer, that it actually implies that, well, the future doesn't exist, as I said. So even if we're designing for tomorrow, like literally tomorrow, or even for the next hour, or if you're designing for 5 years away, you've got to be, you've really got to be present and now, you know, kind of based in what's actually happening now. And any good designer would know that. Obviously, you've got to understand the current state and really map that out. So actually, I guess what I'm saying is that the idea of futures, I would actually call it presentism, because it's actually being really present to what's happening now is really powerful. So it's, yeah, if anything, we're you know, it's just about thinking about how far out you want to be thinking, and you can, the same principles can be applied, and it's just it's about I think understanding that there are options that you can you know, different scenarios that you can present to people, and giving them the space to be able to see that there's not just one future that can happen. There's any number of different futures that can happen, and then working out the bits that you can shape and the bits that you can't shape.
Okay.
Hope that answers that.
It might lead on actually to the next question, which is, can you describe a successful piece of futures work? And then maybe if you give a bit more context about how that work actually came about.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, if I just stop sharing for a second and I'll find, I've got in my slide deck here a whole range of different things that, oh gosh, there's lots of different really interesting things that I could draw on in terms of Futures work that has, all right, so this might be this is an interesting example to share. You can still see my screen there. Oh no, if I'll reshare. Dun, 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 dun. All right, the example that I'd give is of the work, the thing that springs immediately to mind is the work that Shell did with its scenarios. And that actually, are you all seeing my screen now? I love this when you've got several. Here we go. No, I need to share my screen again. I mean, that's a really great question. I mean, there's lots of different futures work that's been done, and I could, probably give a range of different examples. But this just springs to mind because I've got a slide here. So you may have heard. I think it's quite famous. Shell's work that they did. Like or loathe Shell, and I know they're a major, extractive oil company, but they actually had the foresight to, ahead of the oil shocks in the early 1970s, well before then, they were actually starting to use scenarios. So actually doing these really major in-depth processes where they would, in detail, imagine a range of different possible futures that could happen. They did scenario planning in great detail, and they were in the process, through that process, they were actually able to kind of ride out the oil shocks really, really successfully. They were a sort of middle-ranking oil company, before the oil shocks, and then because they'd had, it's almost like by the process of them being able to anticipate this, this as a possibility, this seemingly preposterous thing, they actually had kind of almost envisaged it to the point where they were able to then, when it happened, they were kind of far more prepared than any other oil company had been. And there's a lot of really interesting research and stuff that's been written about how this actually set them up for success. So it's in the process of them having that, I guess, that process of thinking through what might happen in this scenario, or it's not like the oil shock was the only scenario that they came up with. They came up with a whole range of scenarios, and it's this, the process of, I guess, of wargaming that some companies use, and that various intelligence organisations use as well. Like just thinking through every different possible scenario. And I know that in the New South Wales Health Department, they're actually using scenarios really effectively at the moment, and there's a whole range of things that sets the New South Wales Department of Health apart in terms of its structure. But one thing that they are doing as well is their process of thinking through options and based on scenarios. So that's one piece of work. I could list others, but it's a really good question. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Mel. There's one final question from Ron. Norms help us make sense of the world. How do you challenge ingrained ways of thinking or mindsets that are biased by norms? How do you detach yourself from these fundamental sense-making behaviours to think of new features?
Oh, fantastic question. Well, I think with delicacy and aplomb, you have to be really mindful of conventions and norms, and it's not to say that you just sort of throw your hands up and or kind of say that they aren't important. I think you just have to read. It depends on who you're working with. Who are these people? Is it the stakeholders that you're dealing with? And I think actually what I've noticed over the time that I've been sort of involved in futures, because I started my Masters in Strategic Foresight in 2004, quite some time ago, and then went off and did other things and then came back. And in that time, I've just noticed there's been this sort of shift from a kind of really academic kind of, a process also of trying to kind of very instrumental approach to foresight, where you sort of say, you know, I've got the answer and I'm going to tell you what to do. And, you know, I'm going to do futures to you. You know, we're going to do foresight and you'll, you know, get ready for it. This movement to participatory futures and to processes where people are, you know, a part of the process, that is definitely, there's a real movement for that. So things like participatory governance within, you know, using futures and foresight methodologies to inform that, and participatory foresight is a thing. You know, in the same way that within design, the process of participation is becoming really central. So my colleagues at Action Foresight are really focusing in on that as well. So that's a really great question. And I guess just fundamentally, you don't want to be doing futures to people, and you've got to meet them where they are.
Okay, thank you. It's really refreshing at the moment to think about different future scenarios. We probably have time for one more question. I don't know if anyone else has one question, or Adam, if you want to jump in.
We had one from Mark just asking about on the previous questions. He wanted to ask regarding how do we plan in the current climate.
Great question. Gosh, how long is it? Well, any number of ways I could answer that. I think that on a range of different levels, the fact that I think within various different parts of government that I'm seeing, that the idea of futures and scenarios is becoming normalized, shall we say, and they're starting to see the value of starting to think about different scenarios. That's one way to plan for now. You know, I think actually we've just had, you know, this massive jolt with these two incredibly cataclysmic things happening off the back of each other, particularly in Australia. You know, we've just like, wow, what a time we've lived in. And I guess, so at a government level, if there's an openness to that sort of way of thinking, and then within, I think within organisations, if you know, as designers, if you can be opening people's minds to the idea that there's not just, you know, we're not just designing for the future that's just going to happen, like it's, you know, a preordained thing that the future is just going to happen. It's like, well, what do we want to have happen, and what are the range of different things that could happen? You know, going back to that list of the 5 questions, even just building an awareness of that, I think would be a really powerful shift, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. And somebody's asked if there's some resources you can recommend. So maybe perhaps we'll get those from you offline, and we can just post it in the group.
Oh,
if you don't mind sharing.
I'd love to. Yeah, that's. I saw that question as well. That's a really, really brilliant question.
Fantastic. You've been absolutely incredible. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mel. That was great. And then maybe we can use the EUXSyd Slack channel as well to put that out there. So if anyone's not already joined the EUX Slack channel, we can definitely put that link in here as well, so you can join, and we can put those resources in there as well.
Great.
Thanks
for your questions. Really great questions, actually.
Well, it's a pretty exciting topic. I feel like we could talk about futures for hours. Do
you mind if I just quickly do a little plug for something that might be interesting to everyone? If I just share my screen again, and I'll find the right slide. There's something coming up that you might, and I would love to share those resources. There's an event coming up. Oh, if I can just find the slide, sorry. For the Museum of Futures, which I'm involved in. And I'll just share people can see the link there. If you go to the museumoffutures.com/pandemic pivots, if I put that in this, because that's a project I'm involved in, and we're actually helping to envisage 10 different futures for Sydney. We're basically getting the 10 Sydney communities and having artists actually envisage a future and creating an object for the future based on that. So, and that's being launched on the 5th of November. So
that is super cool. That sounds like a really cool thing to be a part of. That is amazing. I'm definitely interested in registering for that. 10 different futures for Sydney.
Yeah. Well,
cool.
Yeah.
Do any of them involve the tram?
The tram. I don't know actually. Oh, you sound like what's your preferred future on the tram?
I think it's a cool idea. I think it's cool. Thank you very much. I feel like we could talk about futures for ages. It's just such an awesome topic and so timely. So thank you so much. Thanks, Mel.